What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is the third part of a story where QUIRKLESS Izuku was the wielder of the true spear of the biblical god, ELOHIM. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more information. Now, let's get into part 3. After having his nightmare of his past, Izuku left his bedroom as he searched for a spot to train himself to get his mind off the past. He could be seen in the training grounds of heaven now, as he was twirling his spear around, as well as using magical barriers, in order to make his magical power even higher than originally. He was really putting the work into work ethic. He was pushing himself to the brink as he thought about everything that had happened in the past up until this point. He was in the middle of training when a certain thought occurred to him as he remembered a young woman from his past who was at least double his age, at least by now. I wonder where Ni-san is. Izuku muttered to himself as he thought about the young girl he remembered before she was taken in by the HPSC. He remembered his older sister figure of Kai Natsutsumi as a young woman who was about to enter high school. She had long purple and pink hair that were just highlights. Her eyes were what allured him to her the most, as the woman had the most beautiful purple pupiled eyes with a mauve shade, as well as dark blue eyebrows. He remembered the young woman as she would babysit him, whilst his mother went to work at the general hospital within Musatafu. She was one of the kinder individuals to him when he was found out to be quirkless in the world, and she would always help him with his studies within school. She was a warm place for him since she acted more akin to an older sister to him. Whenever she was nearby, she had made him feel safe, no matter the situation. But with what had happened at the HPSC, he couldn't understand why she would kill the president of the heroes at the time, but now he knew. When reading the article, it stated that she was tasked with killing another hero at the time, but when she ultimately refused to kill said individual, they charged her with multiple accounts of first-degree murder. Aina had come to him multiple times during her life as Lady Nagant as someone who could understand her troubles and tribulations. Izuku never cared that the woman killed villains who could become supervillains in the future. Izuku saw her as protecting the children who smiled at her whenever she came onto the scene. Izuku then decided that before he does any other missions, he will get his older sister back in his life, no matter the cost. And we watch as Izuku left the training room to find Gabriel, so that he could initiate his plans into becoming real. Izuku arrived in 7th heaven as he knocked on the meeting door where he had heard talking between Michiel and Gabriel. "Come in." They both called out at the same time. Once Izuku entered the room, he found Michiel looking at him with confusion as well as concern, and the same was said about Gabriel. "Izuku, are you alright? You seem to be crying," Gabriel asked as she moved over to him. "What?" Izuku asked as he felt his eyes and noticed that there was tears coming from his face. I swore that I promised to stop crying at some point," Izuku muttered to himself as Gabriel giggled softly. "You can cry, dear, that is nothing you need to hide away from anyone, Izuku. In fact, showing others that you can cry is actually one of the strongest things a young man such as yourself can do. Now can you inform us why you are here?" Gabriel asked as Izuku suddenly became nervous. "I want to save someone from where they are being held. They are called by their hero named Lady Nagant. I know her from my childhood. She was like an older sister of mine before I became an angel and lost everything of my own family," Izuku said as Gabriel thought about it before looking to Michiel. "As long as we know the exact location we could appear and disappear with her in tow," Michiel said as Izuku gulped audibly. "Where is she located?" Gabriel asked, looking concerned. "She's in what the humans call torturous prison," Izuku said as Michiel looked at him with confusion. "This woman is in prison. What did she do?" Michiel questioned. "She was forced to kill people in order to keep the status quo for hero society. There was nothing she could do to stop it. They told her that she was protecting the children that she loved so much from future harm. The last time I had heard from her was that she was given the mission to kill someone, a hero who was very high standing in the community of Japan. She refused to kill that person, and they charged her with multiple accounts of first-degree murder," Izuku said as Gabriel looked at him softly. "Why do you wish for us to have a murderer in heaven?" Gabriel asked very softly. "She's not a murderer by choice. She was forced into those situations from the Hero Public Safety Commission. If there was anyone who was a real murderer, it was the HPSC of Japan. They kill people in order to keep hero society standing up. After All Might built it up to be the symbol of peace for all heroes, as well as villains," Izuku said, glaring at the ground. Michiel had stayed quiet for a small bit of time. It was nauseating as Izuku was quiet as he waited for an answer. "Well, I don't see why not. But before we save your sister figure, you need to do something for me, Izuku," Michiel said as Gabriel looked at him. "What are you planning, brother?" Gabriel questioned. "I'm going to the underworld soon, and I would like to have you by my side so that we could finish the treaty between the Asgardians as well as the Christian pantheon as a whole." Once that is done, we will go bring your older sister figure out of torturous prison and make her one of Gabriel's brave saints. Michiel said, as Izuku smiled at the man. I will do it. I've missed kinda one-san for too long. I want my older sister back. Izuku said, running to Michiel and hugging him. We will be leaving within the next hour or two, grab some things that you will be needing soon for this journey into the underworld. I will be waiting for your arrival at First Heaven. Michiel said, as Izuku nodded and ran off. About an hour later, Izuku was seen standing next to Michiel as they were preparing to leave. Izuku heard some movement behind him and found Setsuna standing there with a smile. Hey Set. Izuku said, as Setsuna smiled even more. Hey there Mosshead. Hope your journey comes back with something better than Mosshead hair. She said, teasing him a little. I sure hope that people stop comparing us two as if we were long-lost siblings. Izuku said, as the girl just laughed. See you when you return back from your mission with Lord Michiel. Setsuna called out as Izuku nodded along. Before leaving, Setsuna had run over and given him a hug before letting him go as she called out to him once more. Make sure you find some babes for yourself, she called out, getting the reaction she wanted. Izuku blushing a storm before hiding behind Michiel as they teleported away from the area, appearing in the party within the area where the treaty between the Asgardians as well as the Christian pantheon was taking place. As Izuku stopped his blush from being seen, Michiel informed Izuku to walk around the place so that he could get the hang of being around those who are of sin and prevent himself from falling. Izuku nodded as he left Michiel to the other faction heads as he explored the place in order to see if he could become friends with some others within the party. He walked around the place and found a spot where he could get some drinks of water as well as some other things. Picking up a glass of water, he started to drink from it as he moved about the party, looking for anyone who he could try and befriend. He soon found someone. The man was much taller than himself, he bore brown hair as well as violet-colored eyes. He noticed a holy power behind himself and turned to look around before looking downward to see Izuku standing near his waist. Hello there young man, what brings you here? The young man asked. I'm just exploring the area. Who are you? Izuku asked as the young man smiled. Name's Sarairg Bale. And I am the strongest young devil within the devil faction. Who are you? Sarairg asked as Izuku gave his own name. Midoriya Izuku, I was a human reincarnated into Lady Gabriel's suit of cards. Izuku said as Sarairg smiled. Well, at least she is getting more people within her suit. Now how strong would you say that you are at this moment? I would like to know if we were to spar at any point in the future. Sarairg asked as Izuku thought about it. I wouldn't say that I'm pretty strong, but compared to those who are stronger than me, I'd say I still have a long way to go until I reach the levels of power that Lady Gabriel and Lord Michiel have at current. Izuku said as Sarairg smiled. Well, how about you show me your wings? It could show me how strong you are at a baseline, that way we could work up to see your true strength. Sarairg asked as Izuku nodded. They moved out of the party room as they continued their training conversation, as Izuku was completely unaware that Michiel was smiling at him as they left the party. Once Izuku and Sarairg left the room, Surziches looked at the leader of heaven. How's he been doing? I've heard that he gained the sacred gear of Jesus Christ, Savior's barrier if I remember correctly. Surziches asked as Michiel sighed. Ever since he brought young Uraket into the suit of Gabriel's deck, he has been having nightmares about his past. I was hoping bringing him out here would help him branch out, socialize at the very least. But last night, I peered into his dreams. What he had told us about his past was just the tip of the iceberg compared to what he went through. Michiel said as Surziches looked concerned. Is that why you brought him here? To just allow him to calm down after everything that has happened in the last few weeks? Surziches asked as Michiel nodded. He went on an adventure to the tomb of Gilgamesh a few days prior to this meeting. He came back much more powerful and confident. But I fear that this is only the beginning of a greater turmoil within his heart. He has shown progress with his growth from being completely timid, he hardly ever stutters now. But just because it stopped, Michiel said, before pausing. Doesn't mean that it will always be gone forever. Surziches finished as everyone at the table nodded. Damn, his past must be quite horrible if he is suffering this much, isn't he? Are we sure that he isn't the strongest young man we've ever seen from the humans that are birthed quite daily? Azazel questioned as Michiel looked at the notes. He was forced to grow up during a time of his life where he was supposed to be having fun, hanging out with friends, and instead of that he was abused, betrayed, as well as forgotten. The only friend I believe he had at the time was a young woman named Yayoi Rozumomo from Japan, his homeland. They had been friends for about a year before the young girl had to return back to Aichi Prefecture because her parents needed to return back to the company they control. Michiel said as Surziches clicked his tongue. As the leaders talked to one another over time, Izuku and Sarairg had met outside of the main party room as they talked about future training schedules that Izuku could follow. For Izuku, the young man had been a very good listener as he wrote down every single bit of information he got from Sarayarg for future reference. They were walking around the outside of the building until they had run into Issei as well as the rest of Ria's peerage as they smiled at one another. "Hey Izuku. It's been a while, hasn't it?" Issei called out as Izuku smiled at the young man. "Hey Haidu-san, it's been a few months since we last met one another. How has it been trying to attain your dreams?" Izuku asked as a pained expression came across his own face for all but a millisecond before looking into Issei's eyes. "It's been going great. I can feel like my dream is within arm's reach as of right now. I hope that I can make sure that I can be better at this whole harem thing. Well, how are you doing? You are getting yourself a harem of your own?" Issei asked as Izuku stared at him. "I don't know about that. I would rather stay on heaven's side when it comes to lust. But I would rather not think about that at this point in time, not like any girls would like me anyway, with how weak I am at the moment," Izuku said as he looked away. "Well, don't let yourself fall that low. You beat me in a fight last time we met. Even if it was training," Issei said as Izuku thought back to the small training match between him and Issei, as well as Kiba and the girls from the church. Zenobia had then revealed herself to Izuku as she smiled at the young man, and Izuku smiled at her as the girl waved him over. "Hey Zenobia, how are you doing?" Izuku asked as the young girl smiled at him. "Yeah, I thought about becoming a member of heaven a while back, but I decided against it. So I joined the devils within Ria's peerage, mainly because I wanted to be in a spot where I can show lust and stuff. I was really pent up at the church," Zenobia said as Izuku chuckled softly. "Hey, if you ever need your cherry popped, just come to me," Zenobia said as Izuku blushed crimson. "DP, please do not joke about that," Izuku said as Zenobia looked at him confusedly. "I'm not though," she said as Izuku ran away from the girl. Hiding behind Sarayarg, Riaz noticed the young man as she walked over to Sarayarg. "Hey there Izuku, still choosing to stay within heaven's clutches, are you?" she asked, looking at his eyes. "Why yeah, just hoping that I don't fall too soon," Izuku said as Riaz nodded. "Well, make sure that heaven's most beautiful woman takes good care of you. It's always the ones who are the most kind who turn out to be horrible sometimes," Riaz said as Izuku nodded. He found the answer from Riaz being the exact same for him and Kacchan. The young man and him had been excellent friends back when they didn't have their quirks. But the moment he got his own quirk, he gained a big head, and once Izuku had come out quirkless, the young man betrayed him within a second. As they all entered the main building, Izuku decided to make his way back towards the party in order to talk with some other devils or fallen angels. Once he returned back to the party, he soon found himself all alone again as he looked for Michiel and Surziches in order to stay near the two. He felt that for some reason he was much safer from everyone when he was closer to the two leaders of their respective factions. Once he was close enough to them, he overheard them talking about the treaty with the Christian Pantheon as well as the Asgardian Pantheon as he decided to wait outside the door. Sitting on the ground, he started to pull out a notebook to look over the notes he took from Sarayarg as he thought about future training methods he could use to become stronger, faster than he currently was, increasing his strength now. He was in the middle of muttering to himself when he felt his entire body slowly relaxing and he was starting to lose his ability to stay awake. The soft music in the background as well as the soft speaking of those nearby caused him to slowly pass out from all the partying around himself. Exiting the room after making the treaty finalized, Michiel let out a sigh of relief as he opened the door and felt it hit something on the other side of it. Walking through the door, he soon found out who he smacked the door into as he saw the unconscious form of his little sister's A sleeping on the ground, seemingly without a care in the world. Smiling at the young boy on the ground, Michiel picked up the young boy as for some reason the boy had curled up even more in his arms. Michiel felt like he was holding a baby angel in his arms for the first time since father had created his younger siblings within heaven's power. Smiling at the small boy in his arms, he read the boy's mind, finding it almost assuredly in even more turmoil than it was the other day. Remembering the last few times he had met his older sister figure of Lady Nagant, and Michiel had smiled at the boy as he would make his favor come true soon enough. He used some magic in order to attempt to send the boy away from the party so he could at least rest some more inside of heaven when the front doors were slammed open. Unfortunately for Michiel, the slamming of the doors had woken Izuku up immediately as he pulled the true Longinus out as he jumped out of Michiel's arms and stood in front of him. The boy's wings were out on display once more as he stared at the intruder of the party within the devil territory as they all stared at the newcomer. "Father, what is the meaning of this?" a bluish white-haired man screamed out. "What are you doing here, Loki? Didn't I inform you to not come here? I was on important business." Odin called out from next to Michiel as he pushed Izuku's spear downward without a care in the world. "I am here to prevent you from making a mistake by allying our faction with the likes of lower beings such as devils, angels, and fallen angels." It seems to appear that you have become more senile in your tenure as the leader of Asgard. Loki called out as Izuku stared between the two as he spoke up this time. Should you both see a therapist for familial connections? I'm sure that if you both talk to someone professional about this you could solve your issues. Izuku blurted out as both men looked at him. Loki looked at Izuku with both rage as well as confusion, whilst Odin looked at the young man with a look of fondness. But the most important thing that Odin was looking at Izuku for was the amount of wings the young man held on his back. It appears that your sister's ace has grown stronger, Mitchell. Has he always had 8 wings? Odin questioned, completely ignoring his own son. He went on an adventure into the Gulf of Mexico in order to search for more power, as well as find himself. It appears that it gave him strength as well as power. He gained more confidence as well during the journey. All we need to inform him to do now is make sure he can have fun. Mitchell said, as Odin laughed. I'm sure he could have fun with some of the women of the Grigori as well as these young female devils. Odin laughed as he patted Izuku's back, causing the boy to have swirls in his eyes from the compliment. Loki started to power up in the background as he prepared to use a magic spell to kill the 2 leaders of their respective factions. As the 3 faction leaders as well as Odin spoke with one another about Izuku's progress as an angel of heaven, they all felt the increasing rage of Loki as he prepared an attack. Loki had managed to summon one of his children, Fenrir, as he ordered the dog to kill each of those who dared to mock him. As Fenrir came over to the group of adults to kill them all, a new face arrived and used his magic to seal them away and teleport both the god as well as Fenrir away from the party. Izuku, it's been a bit of time since you last came to these parties. What brings you here? Surziches questioned as the second super devil of the new Satan faction smiled. I've been here for quite some time now, and I couldn't help but notice how one of heaven's angels is looking a bit different. Izuku said, as he stared at Izuku. His spear was now showing an emerald hue to it as he stared at them all confusedly before looking to his spear. But as soon as he took notice of the emerald hue to the weapon, it slowly dissipated as it returned back to its original silver color. With that stated, the group of leaders went into the war room in order to figure out a plan in dealing with Asgard's Loki. God of mischief. Since you sealed him away, how long do you think that seal can work against my son? Odin questioned Izuku. It will only last for 2 whole days. After that we will need to find a way to defeat him without any problems further on. Izuku said, as Mitchell spoke up. Well, if we are creating a task force in order to defeat Loki, I will send my very own little sister's ace in to help in the effort. This could be the area where he will unlock his sacred gear's balance breaker. Mitchell said, as all those present looked at the leader of heaven. Wait, he still hasn't unlocked his balance breaker? Odin questioned. I thought he would have done so already with how many wings he has now. Surziches said, as he stared at the boy in question, who was sitting looking away from the group with a very nervous as well as concerned expression on his face. If he hasn't unlocked his balance breaker, that could be bad for him in the future. It wouldn't give him time to learn how to use the power himself over time, but no matter, we still need his strength as well as power in order to defeat Loki. Seraphil said, as she stood up and looked at the young man. She however noticed something odd about him from a mere glance that the others hadn't noticed about Izuku though. Is there a single strand of silver in his hair? She questioned in her mind. After the meeting with the leaders of the Christian pantheon as well as the Norse pantheon leader, Izuku decided to give them time to create a plan of attack. So as he walked around the building in order to get something to satiate his thirst, he noticed that Riaz and Issei were missing and moved around to find the 2 of them. He didn't have to look far as he noticed how both of them were coming through the elevator towards him, as well as a more balanced Kaneko who was not paying attention to anything. Hey guys. Izuku said, catching Issei and Ria's attention. Hey Izuku, what are you doing looking around the building for us? Aren't you having fun at the party? Riaz asked, as Izuku shook his head. We were just attacked by Loki. Izuku-sama had sealed him away, but it will only last for 2 whole days. So the leaders of each faction are creating an attack squad in order to counter Loki himself. I'm on the attack squad in order to help around with the barriers, as well as overall distracting of Loki. Izuku said, as Riaz nodded. Well, we could bring both mine and Sona's peerages into this upcoming fight against Loki. Although we would need some heavy-hitting backup. Riaz said, as Izuku nodded. The small squad had then continued walking together as Izuku started to pet Kaneko on the head as the girl leaned into the touch. Did you know about my race, Midoriya? Kaneko asked as Izuku looked at her. No, but I felt something similar to a cat when looking at you. Knew you wouldn't like to be given head pats early on in our first meeting, so I decided to wait until now to do this. Izuku said as the girl smiled. The group continued to walk down the halls as they reached the rooms where they all would be sleeping in during their stay until the attack against Loki would begin. Izuku entered his own room as he laid on his own extremely large bed as he placed his body on it as he stared at the ceiling before placing a wing over his body. Pushing his hand through the wing's feathers, Izuku smiled softly as he remembered the dreams his mother wanted for him to accomplish for her. He couldn't help but think that he was achieving his dreams of becoming an angel for her, but at the same time he felt that fighting an evil god was something that a hero would be able to do. Smiling to himself, he thought about his dream of becoming a hero like All Might, and he couldn't help but chuckle at how similar him and All Might would be. He would fall asleep without any nightmares from his past, as he knew that something good will be happening after he fights this evil god from stopping a treaty from happening. Not that he was successful anyway, since the treaty was already signed by Odin, and now that one of his own people were going rogue, they had full clearance to defeat him and send him back to his own faction. The next morning Izuku got up from the bed as he stretched his body and warmed it up with some small exercises, in order to make sure he was fully warmed up for the fight. He knew that the day was coming up for him to battle Loki, and he was mentally preparing for fighting such a manipulative god. He knew that the man would do and say anything in order to defeat the whole group that would come to attack him, in order to prevent his plans from being completed. As Izuku walked down the hallway of the party building, he was making his way over to the cafeteria in order to get some breakfast. As soon as Izuku entered the cafeteria, he soon found himself in a conundrum. He was surrounded by beautiful women in a place where lust was surrounding him from all sides. He blushed from the notion as he sat down at a table all on his own, thinking back to his previous experiences around others and how they usually ended with him losing his lunch to others. He kept quiet. He never spoke out whenever someone sat at his table, just moved himself near the edge of the said table so he could eat in peace without having to interrupt anyone's conversations. It wasn't much longer before the leaders of the Christian pantheon had called up their task force consisting of Izuku being the sole member from heaven, Ria's Gremory's peerage, as well as Sona Citri's peerage. Each of the two girls' peerages wielding Issei Haidu. The Red Dragon Emperor, Kibayudo wielder of Sword Birth Sacred Gear, Kaneko, a Yokai of the Nekomata connection, as well as Barakiel's daughter in Akeno Himejima. For the person who was in charge of that peerage as a whole was Ria's Gremory, a young woman hailed as the Crimson Princess, a ruin within her family, as well as Devil Society for her prodigious ability with her family's magic. For the second peerage, there was Saji Genshiro who wielded the Sacred Gear. Absorption line. Allowing him to take the energy of his opponent over time and allowed him to become a better opponent over time as he held one piece of the Sacred Gear holding Dragon King Fafnir. Then there was Tsubaki Shinra, a young woman with glasses like her king, who wielded a sacred gear that allowed her to form a mirror and reflect any magic attack at her attacker with double the power. And finally leading that peerage was Sona Citri, a young woman of the Citri family, a very prestigious young woman who had perfect control over her family's magical power over water, as well as ice. Izuku entered the room where the leaders of each faction were waiting for him as he stared at some new arrivals, that being Vali Lucifer, as well as some members of his group, consisting of Kuroka, Biku the son of Sun Wukong, as well as a young man wielding a holy sword that Izuku noticed right away and moving closer to the young man. The man wore a normal brown suit that made him look much older than he really was, and the glasses didn't help him much in making himself seem much younger. Izuku stopped in front of the young man as he looked at the blade on his back, its golden color giving away its true meaning, as well as which sword it originally came from. "That's a piece of Excalibur, are you a descendant of King Arthur?" Izuku asked, looking at the young man in front of him. "I'm surprised that someone like you knows about my family lineage. To which I will say that I am a direct descendant of King Arthur himself. Who are you?" The young man asked, as Izuku introduced himself. "I'm Midoriya Izuku, and I hail from Japan. At least in the Musatafu general location of Japan," Izuku said, placing his hand in front of the young man for a handshake. The young man looked at Izuku's wide expressive eyes as he let a small smile form on his face as he shook the boy's hand as he introduced himself. "I'm Arthur Pendragon. I was named after my ancestor King Arthur Pendragon himself. I hope we become close allies in the future," Arthur said, as Izuku smiled. "I hope so too," Izuku said, as he walked away. "I never thought that an angel like your own sister's Ace would be completely docile toward someone wielding the power of Excalibur in their hands," Azazel questioned Michiel. He is aware of the fact that he should be angry about it, but cannot find it within himself to be angry at the young man wielding the power of Caliburn. But Izuku is one of the angels in heaven who does have little care for those who can wield Excalibur. If the sword was back in its whole form, I believe Midoriya himself would be capable of wielding the full power of the blade all on his own, Michiel predicted as Azazel smiled. "Well, let's get this battle underway. You all will be sent to the area where Loki has been imprisoned by Ajuka here. Your mission is to hold him off until Odin grabs Mjolnir from his treasury so that it can be used to seal the young god back in Asgard," Azazel said, as the group all nodded. "Well, with that all said and done, will there be any prerequisites for this mission?" Vali questioned as Azazel smiled. "None, you can do anything within your power just to be capable of defeating Loki, god of mischief," Azazel said, as the leaders created a magic spell to teleport the group to where the battle would begin. Once arriving at the battlefield that would soon become a warzone between the Asgardian Loki as well as the Christian pantheon, Izuku stood on a rock near the prism where Loki was waiting within. Staring at the opponent, Izuku felt the hairs on his body begin to stand on end as he prepared to fight such a being with help. This would be the first time he would be fighting such a foe without much help from the higher-ranking individuals within the Christian pantheon who would be nearby if something bad happened. As Izuku watched as the prism pulsed with Nordic magic, he started to tremble slightly from just the pure power needed in order to keep Loki distracted from the true mission they were doing. He looked over to the left where everyone else was planning out their ideas of what will happen once Loki breaks free from his prison. Within the prism magic, Izuku placed the god within. Moving closer to the group without them hearing his arrival, he overheard that Riaz and Sona were placing him on the front lines with Issei as well as Vali as the main head runners in defeating Loki himself. Whoever Loki would bring to the battle in order to kill them all, they would all split up accordingly in order to take the biggest threats out of the equation from the front head runners of the battle. Floating towards the front of the group, he stood straight as he stared at how the prism now showed cracks all over its surface, as if to show they had no more time. It soon exploded from the pure power behind the god, as he seemed to not even be winded from how the power was holding him inside. He stared at how the god had looked over at them all with complete dismissal, as if to say that they weren't worthy of his time. Izuku then watched as the god had created Nordic magic circles and summoned multiple beings onto the battlefield. Fenrir was one of the said beings who appeared with the god as a few other smaller Fenrirs had appeared on the battlefield. Ah, that is much better. But something else would make you all think twice about attacking me head on. Loki called out as he literally summoned Midgardosmer from wherever he was sleeping and pointed him at the small task force. Izuku revealed his 8 wings that were emerald in color as he flew up into the air to meet Loki head on with his own strength as well as power he held within his body. He was soon joined by Issei as well as Vali as they appeared next to him entering their own balance breakers. Vali had even looked over at him with a smirk as he asked Izuku a question. So you don't think he's worthy of your balance breaker yet, young angel? That is a death wish. He stated as he looked at Loki. I don't have a balance breaker at the moment. Izuku said as he prepared a new magic that coursed through his veins. What is this power you are using then? It's not like the powers we use. Issei asked, curious. It's a magic that only humans could use, but it was lost when the first king of Earth had been around. I am calling it Trason for the moment. Izuku said as once he stated that 2 blades appeared in his hands. Bearing a resemblance to one another, they were short but similar to kukri blades that could be used to clear some leaves of a dense rainforest. Well, at least you aren't coming unarmed. Anything we should be privy to when we fight? Vali asked as his blood started pumping whilst Loki stared at them waiting to strike. We need to keep Loki distracted. If we run out of ideas on how to keep him distracted, I will bring him into a reality marble that I have as a last-ditch effort to keep him busy. He will literally need to kill me within the reality marble in order to escape it, but if I run out of mana, I will have the reality marble drop its power and we will return back here. Izuku said as Vali smiled. Always have something up your sleeve, that's good, definitely could have used it against me back at the meeting between the 3 factions. Vali said as the group of 3 flew towards Loki. As the trio attacked Loki, Riaz and the rest of her peerage with Sonas had split up in order to take down each member of Loki's small army. Riaz, Sona, Tsubaki and Akeno had gone after Midgardosmer, whilst the rest of their peerages took on the multiple Fenrir dogs. The groups were going great against their opponents, and whilst everyone was busy keeping their foes busy, Izuku was making sure that he could use the magic he is now pulling out after using it during training. He was working on the singular wish he asked for Sir Michiel to do for him, bring his older sister figure out of torturous prison within the human realm and bring her into heaven's home. He swung each of his blades with purpose, with power as well as with the intention to do some kind of distraction against Loki, as Issei and Vali powered themselves up more during the fight. Loki was being pushed back only slightly by all 3 of them working together, since they had to defeat him or just distract him long enough for Odin to arrive at the battlefield. Izuku went in for an attack from behind. Loki dodged this strike from behind, but was slammed into from an attack from his left by Issei, before being sledgehammer slammed into the ground by Vali, who started to have the god's powers. Once Loki stood back up, he felt his power being halved over time. As he smiled at the group, showing more of his power, he attacked the group with ferocity. The group barely had enough time to dodge the strike, whilst Izuku was punched directly in the stomach from the god's surprise attack. Being slammed towards the ground, Izuku shook off the pain from the surprise of Loki's speed as he flew back into the battle. He soon heard the sound of Odin calling out to the group, stating that he had just arrived to Asgard and that he was now searching for Mjolnir. Izuku knew that they wouldn't have enough time to buy time for Loki's demise, so he decided to look directly at Loki as he moved away from the two fighters. He stood off to the sidelines as he stared at the people he would be bringing into his reality marble. I am the bone of my sword. Steel is my body and fire is my blood. I have created over 1,000 blades. Unaware of beginning, nor aware of the end. I withstood pain with inconsistent weapons, my hands will never hold anything. Yet, my flame never ends. My whole body was unlimited blade works. During the time Izuku was stating the name of his reality marble, Issei and Vali had been thrown to the side as soon as Loki noticed a distinct lack of an angel. Looking around the battlefield, he saw that everything was slowly changing from the battlefield he was in as snow started to move about the whole area. Issei and Vali looked around themselves as they saw mystical gears in the sky as well as hundreds, no millions of bladed weapons surrounding the area. Looking off in the distance they felt a familiar energy slowly moving about the area, and once they got a look at the young man in question, they found Izuku standing in the snow-filled paradise. Loki had done the same as he stared at the seemingly new form of the young man. He stood just shorter than both Vali and Issei as they stood next to the boy. The most changed part about him was the simple fact that his hair was a different color now. It was still mostly green, but it was changing to a different color. It was changing to a silver color as his eyes remained their emerald color, and as he walked around the place Loki looked at the young man. You've changed. He stated as Izuku stared at him. He was neutral in his facial expression, but there was one emotion that was shown on his face: sadness. Issei and Vali had noticed it but said nothing about it as the young man continued to walk around the place as he stared off into the distance. This place was created from the number of roaring emotions that are hidden underneath the surface of my body, as well as my mind. Izuku said, picking up a blade. It was golden in color, but the power from the said blade was multiple times weaker than the weapon that Vali had noticed, shared a resemblance with another that he knew about. Everyone watched as Izuku lifted the blade and pointed it at Loki, as the god looked at the boy with confusion before smiling. You think that measly weapons within this world will be capable of hurting me? A god. Loki laughed. No. This is all a distraction for the real weapon that will deal the final blow to you. I am just a mere distraction to you, to hold you here until that real weapon arrives. Izuku said, as hundreds, no thousands of blades had risen to the sky and flew towards the god. Loki immediately placed a magic barrier around himself as the sword slammed into the barrier extremely hard. Izuku moved around the field as he came up behind the god and began increasing his speed to get to the god himself. When he was within striking distance, he moved past the god, letting him know he would have died if he didn't keep an eye out for the young man through the massive group of blades coming at him from all sides. Each blade broke on the barrier, but each one was replaced with a much stronger and more durable blade as they continued to assault the god's barrier. It got to the point that Loki's barrier was beginning to crack, and Izuku came through the massive tsunami of blades as Issei and Vali did the same. Once Izuku slammed a new blade onto the barrier magic, the whole thing broke apart as Loki did his very best to use his magic in order to break each and every single blade that came really close to him. Izuku pulled his new blade out of a golden magic portal as he watched its blade move in horizontal compartments with weird Mesopotamian languages all over it. Izuku then walked calmly over to Loki as the god finally destroyed each and every blade that Izuku sent his way. Once Izuku was too close to be countered though, the young man had struck right when Issei as well as Vali did. A dragon shot had slammed into the god's back, sending him tumbling down to Izuku's feet, and Loki felt his magic be halved once more. Izuku then pointed the blade's pointed end at the fallen god as Loki stared up at the emotionless boy at the moment. And for just a moment the god felt something he hadn't felt in millions of years: fear. He felt fear from this young angel who had learned how to become a better fighter, and he wouldn't allow it to go any further. Loki's internal monologue was stopped when Izuku thrusted his weapon towards the weakened god. Pierce. Loki coughed up massive quantities of blood as he looked at the new wound on his body. This young angel, who wasn't stronger than even a seraph, had dealt a fatal blow to him. Deep within the god's chest was a hole as if someone had pierced through the god's chest with their own arm. Izuku stared at the god as Loki stared at him with bloodshot eyes. As Izuku smiled at him, it was filled with something so unnerving that Loki thought that it didn't belong on such a young man. Izuku had stated two words. Enuma Elish. Before everything within the reality marble had blown up. Izuku stared at the Loki that was knelt before himself. He noticed that it started to twitch and throb within the destroyed landscape that remained of his reality marble. It was then that Vali and Issei landed next to him with smiles on their faces as they looked at him with smugness on their face. Wow, I can't believe that Loki was as weak as we thought he was. It seems like we didn't need Mjolnir to seal him away. Issei said, smugly. Izuku kept a close look at Loki's kneeled form as he tried to discern why he was getting a foreboding feeling at the moment. Vali used this moment to speak up as he was looking more serious like Izuku was in this moment as the young devil descendant looked at Izuku with a confused look. "Is there something on your mind at the moment?" he asked, looking into Izuku's concerned eyes. "He's not the real one," Izuku said, as everything around them fell apart as they noticed the reality marble failed. "Well, it looks like your reality marble ran out of power," Issei said, as Vali kept note of the ability's time needed to be kept up. Izuku started to feel out in the area for the familiar energy belonging to Loki, and for some reason it was being hidden, but Izuku could feel a presence nearby, and he instantly looked in its direction. Once Izuku stared at where he thought the presence was located, his face was entranced with complete shock as well as complete fear. Vali and Issei noticed Izuku's change in demeanor as they looked around the area for what could be causing the young angel, the amount of fear he was releasing. You up in the air," Izuku said, as he prepared himself in a fighting position. Up in the air watching them from the safety of the sky was Loki, looking no worse for wear as he smirked at the young angel with a mirth in his eyes that made him truly seem impossible to defeat. Ha 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 ha. Loki laughed as he tossed a seemingly manifested bag of popcorn behind himself. "You should have seen the looks on your faces. That was beautiful. I cannot believe that you all forgot that I was the god of mischief for a reason." Loki laughed. With Riaz and the rest of the peerage of both her and Sona, they were taking down Fenrir as well as Midgard Osmer. They had managed to take down the massive dragon illusion as they had blasted it to Kingdom Come with both their own magic as well as its own magic had launched at them. It took out Tsubaki early on in the fight, but it was enough for Riaz and Sona with Riaz's queen, Akeno, to take down Midgard Osmer. After that, they all moved on to take down the multiple Fenrirs, until all that was left was the real Fenrir, who was fighting both Kaneko as well as Saji. Both were having extreme troubles with taking it down, since one hit from it would cause so much damage that they could barely get up in time before being attacked. Kaneko's defense against such a powerful dog was basically reduced to nothing, since the beast only smacked her away with his paws or his claws, sending her flying into the rock face nearby. Saji was faring not much better than the resident Nekomata as he was beaten to all hell, bruises all over his body, tears in his shirt as well as pants. He even had a slice mark on his back in the shape of Fenrir's claws that showed that he didn't escape all the time from the monster dog's attacks. Riaz, Akeno and Sona had come in and managed to deal enough damage to the dog that once it backed away someone else had moved in and slammed their weapon into the beast's head. Kiba as well as the Valkyrie who arrived early on at the fight joined up with them as they looked at the sky as an explosion had shown up there. 3 figures fell towards the ground, and once they all got a closer look, they had noticed that it was Izuku, Issei and Vali as they all smashed into the ground. Out of the trio of boys, Vali and Izuku were the only ones capable of standing back up and looking more worn out than Issei was. As Izuku walked forwards, he looked at Vali as he started to charge his weapon E in order to create a larger scale attack at Loki. Both Vali and Loki clashed in the air as they both increased their powers to the maximum, with Vali stealing power from Loki and the god increasing the amount of power he used against the devil descendant of Lucifer. Izuku then took off into the sky as he flew faster than he had before as he pulled back his right arm and thrusted it forwards, calling out a new attack. Inumalashara. A massive blast of black and red energy blasted towards Loki, who placed a barrier around himself before looking at Izuku. The young man was staring at him with nothing short of concern as he flew back towards the ground, but apparently that wasn't fast enough as Loki appeared behind him and pierced through his chest with his arm. It didn't hit his heart, but it did land near his lungs as well as diaphragm, causing him to cough up blood before collapsing onto the ground. You are the more dangerous opponent, to think you are wielding the power of an ancient king of Mesopotamia. You are nothing more than a disgrace to that king, you believe that you are above all beings. Loki scolded, as well as mocked. I don't think I'm better than all races. I'm just trying to stop you from preventing peace from being made between all races. Izuku said, as he stood back up. I pierced you through your chest, you shouldn't be capable of standing. Loki said, amused. Let's just say, my upbringing wasn't as great. Izuku said, as he tore off his shirt. All the scars as well as burn marks on his skin was revealed to everyone around himself as he started to power up as much as he could. His sacred gear, True Longinus, had appeared behind himself as his aura exploded outward towards Loki. The god merely swatting away some rocks that were coming in his direction as he wanted to see what the young angel was capable of. Maybe I should take care of those you deeply care for. If you are not capable of achieving your balance breaker with that sacred gear, maybe you should have died before you became a member of Michiel's faction. Loki mocked. Izuku stared at the god as soon as the man stated those words, his mind was moving back to a time where everything was horrible. He could hear all the people around him not wanting anything to do with him, the abuse, the bullying, the lies, everything that was done to him in the past. On the outside, Izuku's power had stopped growing and for some reason had been slowly but surely breaking apart. The golden portals that were appearing behind him slowly dissipated as he stared at the god in question. "Oh, did what I tell you hurt your feelings? You are an angel, right? You shouldn't feel any kind of pain from anything other than battle." Loki mocked some more. As Izuku's mind continuously devolved from the mental torment that Loki was handing out to him, Izuku couldn't help but think the god was right. He had only made strides when he put himself forward as well as made sure he could try and become a hero. He never did that before. And once his mind had hit rock bottom, he didn't think it could get even further down in his mentality. All the confidence he gained from looking through Gilgamesh's tomb, it all disappeared. All that remained was a mentally broken boy who, from what everyone could see, was letting out massive torrents of tears from his eyes as he stared at the god Loki. "An angel before me is crying, never had done that before. I know that my words are just to get under your skin. But is it so bad that you are crying at this moment? Some angel you are. I wonder how shamed your mother would feel if she saw you now," Loki said, and as soon as he stated those last few words, everything snapped in Izuku's mind. Just a few moments before Izuku's mind had snapped due to something his mind couldn't handle, deep within the depths of his mind, a metaphorical wall was seen cracking. Each mocking statement had sent a wave of new cracks within the structure that was preventing such hurtful things to get past. But as soon as the last words of Loki's statement about Izuku's mother had been absorbed into the young man's mind, the wall made of pure glass had started to creak as well as crack. Everything about the glass wall was protecting the young man from releasing every single bit of rage, as well as anger that was behind it. Izuku had kept himself far away from releasing his rage as well as anger, not to mention his sadness at how the world dealt him a horrible life. And as soon as the comment about his mother's shame in him caused the glass wall to crack and break completely. And within the depths of Izuku's mind, he could actually hear the cracking as well as the breaking of his mental block from his feelings of rage, as well as sadness and anger. Not to mention the overwhelming feeling of loneliness. As soon as the break of his mental wall happened, Izuku's power skyrocketed as he rose into the air. His eyes losing the color of emeralds and being replaced with nothing but a white color. His hair was changed from a normal forest green color and slowly changed into a silverish white color altogether. Izuku's frame had also increased slightly in height as well as muscle mass as he became much more muscular than he previously was. His spear had increased in length as well as new black clothing had appeared over his body. It was similar to battle gear for an underground hero. It covered his entire body from head to toe as he stared at Loki with unbridled fury as he flew towards the man. Izuku's wings a flurry of emotions as they couldn't understand whether or not they wanted to fall for releasing all the pent-up fury and rage, sadness, loneliness, as well as fear within his soul. As soon as Izuku was upon Loki, the god had prepared for an attack, but nothing had come for him. Releasing his guarded position, he got a closer look and he noticed that he looked like a younger Gilgamesh who was making waves in early Mesopotamia based on the knowledge of all races about the two-thirds god. Loki bathed himself in the glow of Izuku's new form before he felt something pushing deep into his stomach. Looking down, he found that Izuku's fist was pushing into the man's stomach as he looked at the boy in question. Loki was immediately starting to feel slight pain as the boy then kicked him into the air and started to toss him around like a ragdoll. The god couldn't even manage to see what was happening to him as he tried to counter with every magical spell he could use in his arsenal. But nothing seemed to work on Izuku as the boy seemingly phased through each attack he released, and it got to the point of which he tried to escape the area to live another day. But as soon as he flew towards a new area to fight, he felt something wrap around his legs and slam him into the ground. Heading up from the ground, he noticed golden chains wrapping up around his entire body as the boy was coming closer to him. True longiness in his hands as he glared at the god with all the fury that was withheld deep within the recess of his mind being released for the first time in ages. "You can make words and comments about me, but you cannot and will never, ever, mock those who I associate with. You can say what you want about me, I will roll with the punches. But the moment you bring up my dead mother or how she would feel about me, that is when you will rue the day you messed with me." Izuku growled at the fallen god as he raised the true longiness. Izuku's expression betrayed how he spoke to the god, his fury-driven mind, as well as body was betraying the calm words that came from his mouth. Izuku then tightened the chains all over Loki as the man started to grunt with effort to try and escape from them. "Those are the chains of Enkidu, the one true friend of Gilgamesh. You want to know something that is oddly similar between me and Gilgamesh, Loki?" Izuku asked as he gave information about the chains surrounding Loki's body. How am I not capable of breaking free from these chains? I'm a god," Loki screamed out as he struggled more. "Me and Gilgamesh never had a friend growing up, we were both lonely growing up until now. But where the differences begin to show themselves, he was more arrogant, I was more tender, shy, and most of all, kind." He became a ruler of Mesopotamia who ruled with an iron fist. Through his power as well as strength, the people of Mesopotamia had listened to him and looked to him as a hero and king. I don't want the same thing, but I wouldn't certainly say no to the title of king. But as of right now, you are in the way of peace being known throughout each and every faction that has been known at this moment. Izuku said, as he glared at Loki even harder. Loki finally released his full power, as it broke the chains covering his entire body as he attacked Izuku, and both flew around the battlefield faster than the eyes of those around could see. How are you able to keep up with me at full power? I am a god, you're not, Loki screamed as he landed a few attacks on Izuku's form. The jacket as well as pants that covered the boy's form had released magical sigils as it created a small barrier around his body. Izuku then kicked Loki in the face, sending the god to the ground before appearing around the god as he glared at Izuku hard. Savior's barrier. Izuku muttered, causing Loki to look in confusion at him. Once Izuku muttered those two words, a massive barrier surrounded both him and Loki as Izuku stared at Loki with his anger, seemingly lowering enough for one of his eyes of emerald color to appear once more. Well, looks like your anger is slowing down against your mind. Running on fumes. Loki taunted as Izuku landed a flurry of punches on the god's stomach, causing him to cough up spittle. Just because my rage has tapped out doesn't mean that I can't use the new form I'm using. Izuku said as he kicked the god into the barrier's wall. The god was, needless to say, electrocuted from all sides as he felt pain in all his muscles in his body as he fell to the ground. This is not possible. I am a god. Loki. There is no way that why your power far surpasses mine. Loki called out as he stared at Izuku in newfound fury. That, added with the amount of power used against Izuku's new form, caused him to feel a lot of exhaustion moving in. Just because that I cannot defeat you doesn't mean I don't know how to fight someone who uses the same moves. Izuku said as he appeared behind Loki and grabbing the god's arm and twisting it a bit. Izuku then released his barrier as he noticed Issei in the distance holding a new weapon, and the boy smiled. You're Loki, the god of mischief, right? Izuku asked as Loki looked at him. I am a god, you dull creature, how dare you mock me? Loki growled. Because a new foe is coming to you, with a way to send you back to Asgard. Izuku said, smiling. It was at that moment that Loki stared at the incoming form of Issei as he smirked at the incoming form of the Red Dragon Emperor. Fenrir. Loki screamed out as the small dog that was captured by Volley team had disappeared from view and appeared in front of Izuku and Loki. The dog then raced towards Issei as it attacked the Red Dragon Emperor, and once the Red Dragon Emperor had been pierced through his armor by the dog, Izuku stared on in horror. He landed a chop on Loki's neck as the man fell to the ground and Izuku flew towards the beast. As soon as he was upon the beast, he kicked the monster in the chest, causing it to release Issei from its mouth, and Izuku flew in front of its face and released a powerful right hook into its mouth. Knocking a tooth out of its mouth, although the tooth grew back instantly, the dog had looked at Izuku with slight fear. Izuku glared at the beast. Izuku grabbed Issei and threw him over towards Rias and the others as they fritted over the seemingly dead young Red Dragon Emperor. Izuku looked at Fenrir as it looked at him with confusion as well as slight fear, and Izuku couldn't help but feel bad for it. The creature was being used by Loki as a pawn in his battle, and Izuku gained an idea for the creature as he smiled at it. Hey buddy, I know that this might seem misconstruing with what you did to Issei, but could you stay near the others and I will figure out what to deal with you then? Izuku asked as the dog for some reason listened to him. Izuku looked at Loki as the man was making his way over to the boy who was staring at Mjolnir with something written on his face. Don't even try to use the weapon. Odin probably stated that the Red Dragon Emperor would be capable of wielding the powerful Asgardian weapon. Loki said before watching Izuku place his hands on the weapon's hilt. Back with Rias and the others, they found Issei's body full of holes as they seemingly mourned for his seemingly death. But it was here that a small box of something had fallen into the boy's hand as they all noticed it, and once opening the box, they saw it was a spare set of phoenix tears. Looking at one another, they started to heal the unconscious Red Dragon Emperor so that they could have him enter the fight once more. Izuku swung Mjolnir around the battlefield as Loki did his very best to not be hit by the weapon of his older brother. How are you able to wield the power of Thor? That makes no sense. Loki screamed in fury as he dodged another swing from Izuku. I don't know how, but for some reason I feel as if I could wield this weapon. But that doesn't matter, because after this fight, I will return it back to Odin and never use it again. It's nothing like my true longiness, but speaking of that weapon of choice, I believe I know what I just managed to do before regaining control over myself. Izuku said as Loki stared at him in confusion. Izuku smirked at Loki before stating something that the god thought the young man couldn't be capable of using. Balance breaker, Dark Warrior. Izuku called out as magic portals appeared around his entire body. The magic sigils appeared around Izuku's form as the black getup had evolved even more, as the young man had powered up even more. He wasn't anywhere near Loki's power, but it was a significant power boost to which he caught the god off guard. Slamming the side of Mjolnir into the man's hip, Izuku smiled at the god as he released his new form's glow. Golden chains had flowed around his body as well as wrapped themselves around his arms as well as legs. His head was covered by a golden helmet that showed only the whites of his eyes, as he wore a golden cape on his back. The black jacket as well as combat pants and boots were all that remained the same as the young man stood in the air, as electricity had slammed into the body of Loki. It was here that Issei had arrived and assisted with Izuku in sealing Loki away, and unlike a certain timeline of events, Loki wasn't capable of cursing Issei with the problems with his harem. Once Loki had disappeared from the battlefield, both Izuku and Issei looked at one another before flying back towards the others. Once landing near the group, Izuku saw that volley team were moving on Fenrir as it was running towards him and Issei. Issei jumped away from Izuku at the last moment, believing that Fenrir was going to attack himself first. But when the dog ran past Issei, the young man looked at Izuku who was releasing his balance breaker. And as soon as that happened, Izuku placed a hand over the gaping hole near his heart, but that was long enough where Fenrir was upon the boy. Looking behind himself, Izuku saw Fenrir looking down at him from his 15-meter tall look, and as soon as the dog looked down towards Izuku, it bared its fangs towards the boy. When everyone thought that the dog of Loki was about to kill Izuku for defeating Loki, it did something nobody was preparing for. It shrunk down to about 5 meters tall in height as it lowered itself for Izuku to lean on before the boy passed out onto its fur. The dog then picked the boy softly into its mouth before running off in the direction of the party where the devils were partying out at. Is it just me, or did Izuku manage to tame a godly wolf? Issei questioned as everyone just nodded at the boy's blunt question. On the back of Fenrir, Izuku's eyes were closing, but there was something different about Izuku's left eye. It wasn't emerald in color anymore. This one was a muddy teal color compared to the normal emerald color. It had been a few hours since the battle with Loki had ended. Izuku was still losing blood as he was being brought over to the young devil's party. He had slowly been losing blood the entire time Fenrir had been bringing him over there as the small globs of blood fell off the dog and onto the ground. It wasn't much longer before Fenrir had soon arrived at the party as the dog kicked the doors down, causing those who were partying out to stop what they were doing and look over at her. Fenrir then moved over to Michiel and turned to her side showing Izuku. As soon as Michiel had noticed Izuku's condition, he immediately started to attempt to heal the young man. This isn't fatal, what happened to Izuku? Michiel asked as he worried over Izuku's injured form. A few magic circles had appeared on the ground, revealing the Gremory peerage as well as Sona's peerage. He was one of the lead attackers of Loki, and he managed to deal with the god on his own, with some slight assistance from Issei near the end of the fight. Loki had managed to impale his body with his arm near the end of the fight, thankfully it was near his diaphragm. Riaz said, as Michiel nodded his head. I would be taking Izuku back to heaven with me so that he can recover in peace and quiet. I can certainly hope that you all have a great weekend, but at the same time, I can only hope that Izuku can rest easily. Michiel said, as he teleported both him and Izuku with Fenrir into heaven. Once landing in heaven, Michiel took Izuku over to 5th heaven in order to give the boy to Raphael to complete his recovery. And Izuku would remain there until his body was fully recovered over the coming weeks, although he was visited by Gabriel as well as Setsuna over time. There was even a special guest appearance of Irina, as well as a girl with vines for hair. Over the coming days, Izuku laid in the bed within the hospital within heaven as he thought about everything that happened at the fight with Loki. He was still asleep when he felt himself be pulled into a familiar dream he'd had before many times over when he was still getting over nightmares. As he looked around the area to see what was happening to him as well as his surroundings, he soon found a tall man with blonde hair as well as a fringe of red near the top. He was wearing golden armor as well as holding a book in his left hand as he stood off to the side as Izuku watched as the man started to change the area to something that would be both calming as well as perfect for himself. Once the man settled on something, they soon arrived on a rooftop, the very same one that Izuku had met All Might on, as the man created a throne out of nothing on it. Turning around to sit in the throne chair, Izuku watched as the man leaned his head onto his left hand as he then opened his eyes, revealing his heterochromatic eyes of ruby red as well as silver in color as he merely glared at the boy who was staring at him in awe. Well mongrel, you have a lot of nerve using abilities that I gave you in order to defeat that worthless mongrel of a god. So tell me, why weren't you strong enough to do the final blow yourself? The man questioned as he glared hard at Izuku. Outside the dreamscape, Setsuna and Gabriel were noticing a small energy forming around the head of Izuku as they watched it in concern as well as worry. They had no idea about what was happening. Izuku had been asleep for 36 hours so far and he hadn't woken up yet. They were beginning to think that something horrible was happening to the young angel in training. So as they went to get Raphael in order to see what was happening, they never noticed how a bunch of golden chains had formed over the boy's body and wrapped around his body and restraining him to the bed. Back inside the dreamscape, Izuku was held in the air by the man who had just appeared in his dream world. The man had been glaring at him with such a hatred that it made Izuku feel more fear than Bakugo, who would be coming in to bully as well as abuse him. Well, mongrel. How are you my descendant if you cannot even keep your own fear hidden? If you are to be my descendant, you need to become much more confident, arrogant, not to mention show those women who are around you that you are the boss, not them. The man said, as Izuku stared at him in confusion. Sir, can I know your name? I don't know you. Izuku said, as the man merely smiled at Izuku with a fury hidden behind it. I am the being whose powers you absorbed into your body. Did you not think about how it was so easy to do so, mongrel? The man said, as his golden armor clacked as he walked around. As soon as Izuku regained his memory about the tomb, Izuku's eyes became enlarged even more as he uttered out a word that he thought was impossible. GG Gilgamesh. Izuku asked, as the man simply smiled. Finally, it only took you about 15 minutes, but you are learning. Now mongrel, what was your thought process when using my strength for literally the last part of that battle against a trickster god? The man, now known as Gilgamesh, questioned. I didn't know if it would work. He was way stronger than me based on magic as well as pure strength. Izuku said, as Gilgamesh just clicked his tongue. You wielded my powers without fail, they were more than enough to put the trickster god in the grave. You just need to become much more proficient with my powers, and I have the perfect way for you to do that. Gilgamesh said, as he smirked evilly at Izuku. What is this way? Izuku asked, as Gilgamesh told Izuku, the boy's eyes became as wide as dinner plates. Back outside, Raphael had arrived in the room to find the chains of Enkidu slowly dissipate as the young man was slowly becoming awakened from his bed rest. As the seraphim had moved in on the boy and started to fret over him as well as do some physical tests on the boy, he never noticed how the boy wasn't even talking to him. He was silent the entire time as the boy continued to allow him to be tested on for good health. Once Raphael had left the room and was replaced with Gabriel, Satsuna, Irina and a new face, Izuku stared at them all with confusion. One of his eyes were closed as he stared at them in concern as well as worry as they moved closer to him. Izuku. I'm so happy you're safe. You worried me when you didn't wake up as early as Raphael had told me you would. Gabriel said, pulling Izuku into a hug. As Izuku's face was pushed into the woman's breasts, the young man thought about the man he was told to essentially torture for Gilgamesh's amusement. Looking up at the woman who had protected him ever since he first became a member of God's angels, he smiled at her and hugged her close. When he stood up from the table, he walked over to the other girls as he gave them all a hug in order to calm them down. He gave a curt nod to the vine-haired girl as he left the room with a mission on his mind, and as he made his way away from the area, he was unaware of how Gabriel was looking at him in confusion. By the time he arrived at second heaven, he stood over a magic circle as he would begin the next part of his journey as an angel in training. He would save his bully from being transformed into a villain for the supervillain All for One to use at his disposal. As he slowly started to fall towards the grounds of Camino Ward, he watched as a fight was happening at the moment between two titanic individuals. Landing on a building nearby, Izuku watched as the two titans fought in the middle of a destroyed warehouse, and nearby a young boy with an explosive quirk was fighting to stay away from the League of Villains, if he heard right from Gilgamesh. Letting out a fear-filled sigh, Izuku jumped into the air in order to make himself appear as if he was coming from heaven itself, in order to prevent this battle from continuing further. Once his presence was noticed by all the villains as well as the heroes on the scene, they all started to question one another about who was now arriving on the scene. The one who was the most confused though was the explosive teen who was staring at the blinding light. Once it was dissipated, the young man noticed something familiar about the newcomer as they stood in front of him. I know that this will be allowing the world to know about the supernatural's existence, but I will do what I must to bring peace to my mind. Izuku said, as he revealed his eyes to his opponents of the League of Villains. Why, you're the bastard who stopped my attack on the base of heroes, the blue scraggly-haired young man called out. My name is Midoriya Izuku, and I am an angel of God who has been sent out to smite you all from existence. Izuku said, as he formed his true longinus. Izuku stood in front of the villains as he stared at the entire group of them, Bakugo behind him staring at him with both fear as well as awe. Deku? Is that you? Bakugo asked, completely shocked. Izuku turned his head to look at the young man who made his life for 10 years of his life hell, and as Izuku stared at him, he moved faster than the young man could predict. Appearing behind Bakugo, Izuku lifted an arm into the air as he softly chopped the boy's nape, sending him onto the ground knocked out. Using his magic, he teleported the boy all the way to the group of students making their way over here. He connected his mind to theirs as he spoke out loud so they could understand the tone of voice he was talking in. "Take him and leave, this place is becoming a battlefield," Izuku said as he got a reaction. "Who's talking to me in my head?" A male voice called out. "My name is Midoriya Izuku, and I am an angel of God. I need you to take Bakugo's unconscious body and leave the area, it's about to become a battlefield," Izuku warned as the young man broke through the wall and showed himself. Looking over at Izuku, the young man was revealed to be wearing some weird getup as well as wearing sunglasses over his eyes. Surprisingly, there was another couple of people with him, a young woman with an impressive form, a young man with two tones for hair color, and finally a young man with mufflers coming from his lower calf muscles. Staring at them all, he gave them a nod before focusing on the villains in front of himself. As soon as he started to walk towards the villains, the children who saw Bakugo's unconscious form ran over, grabbed him, and left the area as fast as they could. Off in the distance, All Might watched everything unfold as he merely laughed inside his head at how ironic it was for young Midoriya to come to young Bakugo's rescue. "Who is that child? I thought that he was announced dead a few months ago." All for One questioned, looking at the angel. "None of your concern, you bastard. That young man is more of a hero than I will ever be, although he isn't afraid to kill," All Might said as he launched back at the villain once more. With the two titanic bastions of both peace as well as chaos clashing in the middle of their battle zone, Izuku had moved towards the incoming villains. Once Izuku was within striking range, the young angel had opened a magic circle that surrounded what was supposed to be the young leader of the group. As soon as the young man noticed the circle surrounding his body, it was already too late as it closed down upon him, tearing him in two pieces. "Tamura Shigaraki," Kurogiri called out, fearfully. Moments later, Izuku moved in on the Warper Nomu as he sent multiple strikes at its metal collar as well as grabbed its seemingly formless arm and slamming it into the ground. The simple fact that someone is trying to play God by creating beings such as you are completely both horrifying as well as blasphemy against heaven. God may be dead, but that doesn't mean that humanity should act as him in his stead, Izuku said to the Nomu, who stared at him in shock. As soon as he crushed the metal vambrace on the Nomu's neck, the misty creature had simply dissipated before exploding with a massive shockwave of force, revealing a young man's body with blue hair. Izuku stared down at the body before placing a hand on it and stating only one word, and it caused the young man's body to simply disintegrate. "Purge." Over with the fight against All for One, All Might was having a lot of difficulties since he had long since given his quirk over to young Uraraka. The young girl had been taking to her newly extended lifespan like a fish to water. She had been using magic like there had been no tomorrow and showed great promise. But as All Might fought All for One, it was clear that the villain was becoming more and more desperate in order to kill him as fast as possible. So All Might decides to end the entire fight with one more strike to the villainous bastard. Powering up his quirk to the absolute maximum he could use, which also meant that he wouldn't be capable of using it anymore after this fight, he charged All for One. As the villain had seemingly thought of the same thing, they charged towards All Might as well, and once they were closing in on one another, All Might placed all the power he could into his right arm. All for One did the same as he jumped into the air and was going for a downward strike onto All Might's form. Once All Might dodged to the left, he pulled his right arm in towards the villain's face that was revealed to be completely scarred. The two titanic signs of peace and villainy had clashed once more as massive shockwaves had been blasted from both of their arms, clashing with one another. Izuku could feel the amount of power between the two from his fight against what remained of the League of Villains as Himiko Toga's body lay at his feet as he used Purge once more on the corpse. All for One launched his strongest attack on All Might as All Might did the same, each one stating their ultimate moves against the other. United States of Smash. All for One full body ultra combination. As soon as both men clashed once more, All Might on All for One's face and All for One on All Might's injured left side, both were sent flying in different directions from the force. But there was a clear winner of the fight as All Might lay slumped in the side of a building from the force of the attack. All for One, on the other hand, had his entire head blown to bits on the ground as he laid there, his body attempting to save itself from all the damage it incurred from All Might. Over on the other side of the battlefield, Izuku had finally killed the last of the League of Villains as they lay on the ground being purged from existence. The young man released a sigh of relief as he walked over to the rapidly regenerating body of All for One. The century-long villain standing back up as his mouth was reformed from the bottom up towards his face and scarred eyes. Izuku watched as the villain seemingly laughed at the situation before looking at the young angel that stood in his way from securing his kill. "What are you going to do to me? All Might's power wasn't even enough to kill me," All for One said as his head fully regenerated. "Just because All Might failed to kill you doesn't mean that I won't," Izuku said as he charged towards the villain. Whatever clashes that were described by the reporters on the scene watching the battle of All Might and All for One before as legendary, well, this one was for the history books. As soon as both people clashed in the middle of the field, one didn't even seem like they were even trying, whilst the other was trying to put everything into the clash to win. Izuku had merely moved to the side, letting All For One overextend as he placed his spear over at the man's heart and pierced through the man's chest. As soon as All For One had coughed up tons of blood, the man felt the spear pulled out of his chest as his body regenerated from the damage. You know, for a century-old villain, I thought that you'd be a lot tougher than what I am seeing right now. Izuku taunted as he sent the villain flying with just a slap of his wings. Flying through the air towards the atmosphere, All For One had tried to use some of his more flight-based quirks in order to right himself. But before that could happen, Izuku was already behind him and grabbed a hold on the villain's face before letting gravity deal out the damage about to be done. Truthfully, falling from 50,000 feet was a high range where Izuku could have been flipped by the villain to take the damage. But with all the power he gained within the last year alone, All For One couldn't get the grip on his face off his body as they eventually slammed into the ground with the force of an asteroid slamming into the earth. An explosion rang out from the two, touching back down on the surface of the earth, and as the heroes as well as reporters looked on in shock at the level of power shown, they searched the area for where the villain as well as the new hero were at. Looking at a massive crater in the ground, they found both villain and angel fighting in the middle of it, increasing the depth of the crater as shockwaves blasted through the air. All For One had thrown a wild left hook which Izuku ducked under, then twirled his hands on the arm and lightly pushed it away before sending a kick to the villain's face. As the villain skidded across the ground, he was leaning backward before starting to right himself, but that was when he struggled to stand back up. Looking down at his right arm, he noticed that golden chains covered it from hand all the way up to his shoulder, and that was when more golden chains with a small pointed end had wrapped around his entire body, holding him still. Izuku touched down in front of the villain once more as he smiled at the villain, reaching a hand into a golden portal that formed next to his head. Izuku pulled out a massive weapon that was at least half his size. It was the true size of E, with it being half his own size. He let it activate as the small compartments making up the blade started to twist as well as turn. The red blocky tip had started to glow as Izuku's entire form showed a massive green and blue tint for an aura as he pointed the blade's tip at All For One's chest. There was a saying that an excommunicated priest once said to devils as well as those who strayed from the faith of God. Izuku said, as All For One struggled in the chains even more. Unknowingly making the chains tighten around himself as he struggled to escape from their increased and much more tightening hold. Punished be the wicked, kind of fitting, you know. For a villain who is so wicked that he would turn the descendant of All Might's very own master against him and all of society. Izuku said, as All For One stared in horror. Placing the tip of the blade on All For One's body, Izuku smiled at the villain as he stated only two words once more. Inuma Elish. Izuku said, as a massive red beam blasted through the villain's body and blasted far off into the atmosphere. But the blast moving through the villain's body, everyone who was watching the scene before themselves just sat there staring in both awe as well as horror as a villain who gave All Might a run for his money, even winning against him, had been taken out with something akin to an ultimate move made for gods. As soon as the entire body of All For One was completely disintegrated from existence, Izuku looked over at the slowly dying body of All Might. Floating over to the old hero, Izuku placed a hand over the man's entire injured left side. Sensing the failing body organs inside, Izuku decided to do something that would forever change his view from All Might. He placed some of his power within the man's body to heal and regenerate all the damage that was dealt to the old hero. All Might was still his hero, not to mention idol. So having the hero still be around, even if he was retired, was a more ideal thing to think about than having him die in this fight. As soon as the healing was over, a flaming man stood over Izuku as he glared down at the boy. What did you just do to All Might? He asked, looking like he wanted nothing more than to kill Izuku. Just healed his body too before he was given his injury by the villain who had done this to him. And before you can even think of attacking me, Izuku said, pausing before disappearing from view. As soon as the hero started to look around for the young angel, he felt some slight pain on the back of his neck before he collapsed to the ground unconscious. Looking at the reporters on the scene, Izuku watched as everyone stared at him in wonder, of the heroes and reporters who could see him, that is. Raising his hand into the air, Izuku let out his magic that deleted all recorded evidence that he was even here, as but left the memory that he was there in some of the better individuals nearby. As soon as he moved over to a building magic circle on the ground, someone ran up to him from behind. Stopping in his tracks as he noticed the familiar energy as well as footsteps coming behind himself, and turning around he was face to face with Bakugo, who stared at him with tears coming down his eyes. What are you still doing here? Izuku asked before he felt himself being pulled into a hug. Izuku was stunned from the moment. He didn't know whether or not to push Bakugo away or whether to pull him in deeper into a hug. Look, Deku, you don't have to forgive me for the piece of shit I was for most of your life. But look, I'm so sorry for what I did in the past. I regretted everything that I had done ever since that fucking day, okay? I never got to apologize, believing that you took my advice and did that," Bakugo said, as Izuku just sat there as he felt tears brimming to the surface. "Why are you apologizing?" Izuku asked. "I fucked up, okay? I know I did. I realized it when I found out you ran away from the orphanage. I looked everywhere you could have gone, even that fucked up church on that hill in Musatafu. But you were nowhere to begin with. I never saw how you were trying to be my friend in the past, and with everyone just bringing my ego up over the years, I treated you like you were trash, literal trash under my foot. I know that you shouldn't forgive me for the things I did, but before you leave, I want to at least give myself peace in mind, knowing that you didn't follow my advice as well. But I promise that I will become the hero you always wanted me to become," Bakugo said, as Izuku stared at him in shock. "Kacchan, I always forgave you for everything. I've moved on from that, but if you are willing to be like this because of regret, how could I refuse accepting your apology?" Izuku asked, before hugging Bakugo once more. It was here that both boys let out their tears, finally a bridge slowly beginning reconstruction. After the moment that Bakugo had told Izuku to jump off the roof and pray for another life with a quirk, the young man had left the building. Walking around the area, he soon found himself looking at a certain area where he patrolled and decided to not go down that specific alley. He was currently thinking about the words he told Deku at the moment as he walked on his way back home. He had already left the two extras over in that exact alley, stating that he just wanted to go home for that exact evening. He was so inside his muddled thoughts that he almost missed that stupid Deku sitting on the side of the road with a sad expression on his face. Looking over at the boy, he glared at Deku hard before walking towards him with a hateful glare. But as soon as the boy merely passed by him, Bakugo noticed something off about the boy. He was heading in the general direction of the abandoned church on the hill nearby. It was a really creepy church that worthless Deku and his mother used to go to before that damn villain attack took her away. He always knew that Deku had killed his mother in that attack, and when the boy told him that his thoughts were true, Bakugo decided to just beat him down worse for that. It wasn't until now that it finally clicked in Bakugo's mind. Deku was just entirely alone. Nobody ever came to the worthless orphanage to adopt him. Nobody wanted a quirkless as a potential child. Nobody. His mother and father were doing their best in order to adopt him, so the fact that Deku was walking towards that church made him feel odd. So as he followed him over to the building, he found that the place was still being used by some nuns as well as priests. He looked through the window as he watched Deku enter the confession stand after a few hours of waiting. Sitting just outside the window of the small room, Bakugo listened in on the conversation between Deku and the woman extra inside. And everything Deku said in the room made his heart start to feel tight, not to mention when the boy stated that he was seriously considering following Bakugo's advice. He couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if he actually followed through with it. Thinking he was getting into something that was above his pay grade, Bakugo decided to let the worthless Deku have his time alone. He surely needed it after today, and Katsuki would look back on the words he gave the boy. 3 months had passed by, and Deku had disappeared since the day he told him to kill himself. Every single night ever since then, Bakugo had been getting nightmares about it. He would find himself staring at Deku standing near a building's edge, staring at him with dead eyes before speaking. "You did this to me." Before jumping off the side of the building. Each time the jump happened, caused Katsuki to wake up in a cold sweat, as well as looking around the room holding onto his chest. But the more concerning part about it was the fact that his mind was starting to deteriorate from the fact that he disappeared. Once he had told his mother about Deku not being at school for a few days, Mitsuki Bakugo, a woman who looked eerily similar to her own son, had called the police and asked them to search for him. The case was dropped merely because Deku was quirkless, and they stated that they have more cases that are worth more than him. Ever since then, Katsuki had spent a major portion of his days after that searching the streets for Izuku, hoping and praying to the Shinto gods above that they protect him from any and all harm. It would get to the point he saw a therapist for his anger issues, as well as his apparent disorder of bipolar issues. It didn't help the fact that his school was placed under investigation from the police, stating that they willingly allowed the abuse of Midoriya Izuku. And once the school was placed under investigation, it came out that the place was an indoctrination site for the Metal Liberation Army. Every single teacher as well as student beside him was arrested for charges of villainous activity during school hours, and Bakugo received a warning that if he does this again he will be arrested. Bakugo asked why they weren't allowing him to be arrested. They informed him that they found a small letter within Izuku's bedroom within the orphanage about how he didn't wish for him to lose his chance at becoming a hero, but all the others, they were free game. Even when the bastard wasn't there, he was still looking out for him like the friend he should have been for Deku. Shaking his head as he entered the training facility for his quirk training, he made sure to add the moves that Deku had come up for him whenever he trained. the apt shot, that was Deku believing that if he gathered enough nitroglycerin in the palm of his hand and shot it out, a small ball of explosive nitroglycerin could leave him and do massive damage when left his body. Then came his own move that he created on his own, Howitzer Impact. He made it an homage to how Izuku thought that if he spun his body around in the air fast enough, he could generate enough force to create a shockwave on par with one of All Might's Detroit smashes. There was one thing in particular that Deku had come up with that Bakugo knew that he would add to his hero suit. In the small picture that Deku had made of him when he looked at the small notebook about his quirk, Bakugo rubbed his thumb on the picture of his hero suit with giant grenadier gauntlets over his wrists and hands. Smiling to himself, he thought about how Deku would react seeing him wearing that costume. The bastard would definitely be writing in his notebook. He knew he shouldn't refer to Izuku by the Deku nickname, but he couldn't help it. It was stuck in his head, and he just wanted to change its meaning, so that if Deku heard someone else talking about that name, its meaning of useless puppet would become similar to Dekiru in Kansai accent. Another 7 months would pass, and Bakugo would be standing in front of UA as he thought about how Izuku should have been here with him. "I'm sorry, Deku. I was a piece of shit back then. I'm doing my best to change, and I will show it to you now. By becoming the hero you would want me to become," Bakugo muttered to himself. Walking through the front gates of the school, he was looking around at all the people who were conversing with one another. And just as he was about to walk further, out of the corner of his eye, he found a black-haired young man with red eyes falling over a small tile. His body moved before he could think. He stopped the boy from falling on the ground as he held him by his shirt. "Hey bro. Thanks for the save," the boy said, as Katsuki stared at the boy for a moment. "TCH. Make sure that you don't fall. It's bad luck if you didn't know," Bakugo said, as he walked away. As he walked towards the main building of UA, he couldn't help but chuckle when he heard the sound of manly coming from the young boy. As it turned out, the entrance exams were a piece of cake for him and his quirk as he took them down early on and worked up a sweat. As soon as that happened, his power as well as speed increased as he went from around 35 villain points to within about 2 minutes, being around 73 villain points that he counted. As he stood over a pile of dead robots, he noticed that the black-haired boy had been blindsided by a faux villain, and he blasted over towards the robot. Said robot was about to slam the boy into the ground further when he released an explosion that sent the bot into the wall, destroying it. Holding out a hand, he watched as the other hand grabbed his own, nearly pulling him to the ground without him grounding himself. As soon as the boy was pulled out of the rubble, it was revealed to be the same boy from earlier that morning, as Katsuki smirked. "That's 2 times I've saved you." Katsuki grinned as the boy laughed. "Damn bro. Thanks again. Let's team up on the last few bots," he said, as Katsuki was about to tell him off before a vision of a child like Izuku holding a hand out to him. "Are you okay, Kacchan?" Shaking his head at the memory, Bakugo looked at the remaining bots before smirking. "Want to create a special move together?" Bakugo grinned. "Sure thing bro. What's the move?" he asked, as Bakugo gave him the information. "That sounds super manly. I can't wait to do that," he said, as he held out a hand. "Name's Ejiro Kirishima. What's yours?" he asked, as Bakugo stared at the hand. "Why are you hurting me, Kacchan?" "Name's Bakugo Katsuki, remember it for when I win this thing," Bakugo said, as Kirishima gained a competitive glare of his own. "Well, if we are going to be having a competition, then I won't back down," Kirishima called out, as Bakugo laughed. "Let's go, shitty hair," Bakugo called out, as Kirishima looked confused at the name before shaking his head in fondness and running after him. It's been 2 weeks since the UA entrance exams as Bakugo had entered the classroom that was his for the next 3 years. He had earned first place and came really close to Endeavor's high score on the entrance exams, but about 100 points away from All Might's own score. He had gotten at least 104 faux villain points and at least 30 rescue points. He wasn't aware of those points, but they were welcome since he was becoming more like the hero that Izuku would have wanted him to become. After entering the classroom, he was accosted by his homeroom teacher, who had been there waiting for him for some reason. "I know about the investigation that happened a year ago. Just know that if you wish to stay here, you will need to show me that you are changing your attitude towards others," the man said, as Katsuki nodded his head. Once the other hero students had arrived in the classroom, they all were informed about a quirk apprehension test that they were supposed to take right that moment. And once Bakugo was called upon to throw a ball as a demonstration, he had been training a lot more since Izuku's disappearance, since he wanted to search for the young man himself when he became a hero. So when he threw the ball, he was expecting to get around 750 meters, since he had done that throw many times before to see how far he could throw. So when he threw the ball this time, he wasn't expecting the ball to go even further than his predicted number of meters. Bakugo Katsuki. Ball throw 900 meters. The rest of the tests were basically who was better at what part of the tests, as it was revealed that Bakugo, Todoroki and Yaoi Rozu were the top 3 of the class. With Bakugo sitting very close to Todoroki based on quirk usage as well as creativity on each test. As that day had ended and a new one started, Bakugo was waiting for the new teacher to come in. They had one of their classmates taken out because they were very egotistical towards those who were lower than them. A blue-haired bastard who Bakugo had smacked the back of their head whenever they had tried to leer at their male classmates. They did get a warning for the action, but it was warranted because as soon as their tests were over, Aizawa had expelled the student for them being too distracted. So here he was sitting in class as he heard the sounds of All Might stomping on the ground to arrive, and as soon as he entered, he couldn't help but think about how Izuku would be reacting to All Might being here. "I am here." Coming through the door like a normal person. All Might called out, not even looking like a normal person. Scratch what he said beforehand, the bastard would definitely be nerding out over how hilarious that entrance was. As All Might continued informing his classmates as well as himself about what they will be learning in this class, he was happy to hear that they would be doing a battle training class. And as soon as he grabbed his hero suit and left for the changing room, he opened his suitcase in order to see who made his hero costume. And he was surprised to see a small note on the inside of his suitcase with a small doodle there. It reminded him about how Deku had doodled about hero costumes as well with such accuracy with their proportions, and what they'd need. It made him wonder what would have happened if the young man had tried for hero support. "Hello there Bakugo-kun, I am Nezu. I am the principal of this school and I designed your hero costume with power loader. We saw large grenadier gauntlets for your hero costume and denied them. Having a larger explosion will do nothing for your concussive shockwaves, so we made sure that the gauntlets were much smaller, but with larger storage tanks, in order to dish out close-range attacks. I hope that you continue to increase the abilities you have with your quirk, it will help you on your journey. Not to mention that there are other explosive areas about your hero costume that you will be happy with." As Bakugo placed his hero suit on, he was flabbergasted with how well it fit on his body, not to mention how it fit everything about his aesthetic that he wanted. He was incredibly intimidating with the extra explosive gear on his shoulders as well as hands, and he grinned to himself as he looked at the note once more. Deku would definitely love to make a sketch of his new hero suit. For the remainder of that specific day, he would spend it watching the other students in their own battle training, and once he went, he overwhelmed the enemy team with his full power attacks and unpredictable attack patterns. He had decided to change his attack form as he knew that he always led with a right hook, so if he changed that up for different battles, it would make whether which arm he used first was incapable of being predicted. It wasn't until the 5th day of school that they were going on a field trip over to the USJ in order to learn how to use their quirks in order to save lives instead of defeating opponents. So as they were entering the building with Pro Heroine 13, they were surprised with how the light started to twitch and flicker. Then a large portal appeared in the middle of the plaza as they watched villains come running out of it and spreading around the place. Aizawa had then ran forward telling 13 to evacuate all the students, leaving Bakugo to stay with his classmates. Once they all started to evacuate, they were accosted by a new villain, the Warping One, as he appeared in front of them all. "Hello students of UA Academy, I am Kurogiri and I am with the League of Villains. With our own goal of killing the symbol of peace, All Might. Now, could one of you tell us where he is? He was supposed to be here." The villain, Kurogiri, asked. "Like I'd let you get close to them," 13 called out, using her quirk. Bakugo laid back as he watched the villain react to the rescue heroine and use her own quirk, Black Hole, against her. As soon as the heroine was on the ground in pain from her own quirk taking her own back out, Bakugo struck. And it seemed as if he wasn't alone as Kirishima had attacked the villain with him as they got close enough to land a strike. But before they could, they were teleported away from the area with a portal, and all they could hear before disappearing from their classmates was a few words from the villain himself. That was close. Appearing in a raining area, which dampened his explosive sweat, Bakugo growled softly before hearing a grunt behind him. Looking back at the boy, he found that Kirishima was here with him, so at least he could have someone who could keep up with him. As the two of them teamed up on the incoming villains who were running towards them in the rainy weather, they took down each and every one of them. Kirishima questioned about how they would take down the villain with a metal vambrace over their neck, and it clicked in Katsuki's head. "That's it. We take the bastard down by getting a hold of their vambrace. Shitty hair, you are a genius," Bakugo called out as they increased their speed to get to the plaza. But as soon as they arrived in the middle of the plaza, they were surprised with what appeared to be a literal angel standing in the middle of the battlefield, as he had 4 wings that were emerald in color. Looking closer at the boy standing in the middle of the plaza, Bakugo noticed some familiar things about it. It looked around the area as it searched for something or someone, but as soon as the emerald eyes stared at him for all but a millisecond, Bakugo immediately noticed their familiarity. And as soon as the literal angel disappeared from the area, he ran over to the spot where he last was and screamed out in anguish. God damn it, Izuku. Bakugo screamed. It had been more than a few months since the appearance of the angel, and he had been looking at a gravestone of Iida Tenya. Their class president had gone after the hero killer Stain because the murderer had nearly killed his older brother in a battle during the sports festival. And with the death of Iida, they were now down 2 students within their class, and they were now fearing for who would be next. The simple fact that their classmate had gone out without them being aware of what was happening to him, they were very distraught. So now that they had finished their final exams and had their experience from their internships, they were prepared to go out on a camping trip into the wild pussycat forest. Bakugo was sleeping on the bus as he dreamed about Izuku jumping from the rooftop once again, but unlike many times in the past, he had trained himself to hold a poker face when he wakes up from the dreams like that. Within the 2 days of training with the Pussycats team, Bakugo had increased his power as well as control over his quirk. And he couldn't help but be happier with how his strength had increased even more chances for him to find Izuku out there within Japan. Now he needs to get a hero license in order to search the entirety of Japan and flip it top to bottom in search of him. But something happened during his run-in against the villains who had attacked his class again once more. He was kidnapped by the villain crew as they brought him to their base. He had been sitting in a seat as the leader of the league was staring at him and trying to buy him into the league and have him join them. After refusing them and waiting for the heroes to come and save him from the villainous group, the door was knocked on as it was soon revealed to be All Might who had come to save him. As soon as Bakugo was about to tell All Might about who held which kind of quirk, a black sludge came up from his throat as he disappeared from All Might's view. As soon as he arrived in front of a suit-wearing extra, he thought about how the man's aura was similar to All Might's, but it wielded more killing intent. Bakugo decided that he should try and escape from this place now before he could be caught by both the league and this very tall man. As he took off running, the rest of the league were given express permission to kidnap him again in order to try and bring him to their side. But just before the fight could continue further as Bakugo blasted each villain away from himself, something appeared in front of him. It was soon revealed to be Deku as he stood in front of him with a pensive look on his face. Deku? Is that you? Bakugo asked as he stared at the boy in shock. Deku would turn around to look at him with a slightly fearful expression appearing on his face for a mere nanosecond before he stared at a concrete wall. Take him and leave, this place is becoming a battlefield. Deku said as he got a reaction. Who's talking to me in my head? A male voice called out. My name is Midoriya Izuku, and I am an angel of God. I need you to take Bakugo's unconscious body and leave the area, it's about to become a battlefield. Izuku warned as the young man broke through the wall and showed himself. Looking over at Izuku, Katsuki realized that this new person was wearing a weird getup, but there was no denying that the red hair was familiar, even if it was let down. Shitty hair, Bakugo called out confused. But as soon as Kirishima was revealed to be at the battlefield, Bakugo noticed that there was 2 other people there. It was Yaoi Rozu looking like a very high-class individual, as well as Todoroki who was looking more akin to a thug. Staring at them for a moment, the group surged forward and brought Bakugo away from the area as he watched Izuku give them all a nod before focusing on the battle. Over with All Might, All for One had looked confused at the new arrival, and Bakugo could hear the questioning in his voice. But since he was too far away, he couldn't hear what the 2 Titanic leveled, in terms of power, people were talking about. Bakugo would soon arrive at a spot within a crowd just outside of the battlefield where a billboard was overhead of All Might as both All Might and the suit-wearing villain clashed, creating a massive shockwave. Bakugo watched on in horror as Deku had started to move on the other villains as they started to fight with him. At first Bakugo was worried about Deku before the young man had moved so fast that the cameraman thought that he teleported. But something was even more horrifying as he watched Deku use something to slice Tamura Shigaraki in half, sending the villain to the ground in both pain as well as bleeding out. Deku then changed opponents and went after Kurogiri as he had torn through each portal that was sent his way and soon appeared behind the villain. As the villain trembled in fear at the power Deku wielded, Bakugo could swear that he never thought that Deku had a quirk because one word caused him to become fearful. The young man had grabbed the vambrace of the villain as the villain struggled in the boy's hold as he squeezed just enough that he caused the villainous being to literally explode in a massive explosion of black and purple mist, revealing a rotting corpse on the ground as the young man moved over to the thing and placed a hand over the body, releasing a small tear at the sight. But the boy said something that caused him to fear his power even more as he spoke in a tone that everyone could hear. Purge. The body, who had what appeared to be light blue hair as well as a white bandage over the nose, had immediately disintegrated from existence as Bakugo looked at the face of his victim after a year of disappearing from the face of the planet. It revealed a somewhat desensitized look towards the disintegrating body as he stood back up to full height as he stared elsewhere. It wasn't much longer before the cameraman had looked over at the fight with All Might and the suit-wearing villain as they clashed even more in the middle of the Kamino ward. But as All Might fought All for One, it was clear that the villain was becoming more and more desperate in order to kill him as fast as possible. So All Might decides to end the entire fight with one more strike to the villainous bastard. Powering up his quirk to the absolute maximum he could use, which also meant that he wouldn't be capable of using it anymore after this fight, he charged All for One. As the villain had seemingly thought of the same thing, they charged towards All Might as well, and once they were closing in on one another, All Might place all the power he could into his right arm. All for One did the same as he jumped into the air and was going for a downward strike onto All Might's form. Once All Might dodged to the left, he pulled his right arm in towards the villain's face that was revealed to be completely scarred. The two titanic signs of peace and villainy had clashed once more as massive shockwaves had been blasted from both of their arms, clashing with one another. Izuku could feel the amount of power between the two from his fight against what remained of the League of Villains as Himiko Toga's body lay at his feet as he used Purge once more on the corpse. All for One launched his strongest attack on All Might as All Might did the same, each one stating their ultimate moves against the other. United States of Smash. All for One full body ultra combination. Once both attacks landed on one another, the mask of the villain broke as his entire body was slammed into the ground as a massive tornado had appeared out of rocks from All Might's blow. And as All Might sent a kick towards his opponent, the villain had sent a punch to All Might's left side, sending both of them in different directions into separate buildings. All Might had slumped onto the ground from the building he was sent into as he was knocked out. He lost the fight seemingly as the villain had stood back up. But that fear that All Might could die, the cameraman had moved back over to Izuku, only to show that the young angel had defeated and seemingly killed the remaining members of the League of Villains, before moving his attention on the villain who just got up. Bakugo watched as Deku kept an eye on the rapidly regenerating villain as he walked over to him with a smile on his face. And the smile wasn't on Deku's face, it was on the villain's face as he looked over in Deku's general direction. As the villain stood up at full height he started to laugh as Izuku walked over at the villain on the camera. "What are you going to do to me? All Might's power wasn't even enough to kill me." All for One said, as his head fully regenerated. "Just because All Might failed to kill you, doesn't mean that I won't," Izuku said, as he charged towards the villain. The two then moved towards one another clashing in the middle of what remained of the battle between All Might and the villain. Whatever. Clashes that were described by the reporters on the scene watching the battle of All Might and All for One before as legendary, well this one was for the history books. As soon as both people clashed in the middle of the field, one didn't even seem like they were even trying, whilst the other was trying to put everything into the clash to win. Izuku had merely moved to the side letting All for One overextend as he placed his spear over at the man's heart and pierced through the man's chest. As soon as All for One had coughed up tons of blood, the man felt the spear pulled out of his chest as his body regenerated from the damage. "You know, for a century-old villain, I thought that you'd be a lot tougher than what I am seeing right now," Izuku taunted as he sent the villain flying with just a slap of his wings. Flying through the air towards the atmosphere, All for One had tried to use some of his more flight-based quirks in order to right himself. But before that could happen Izuku was already behind him and grabbed a hold on the villain's face before letting gravity deal out the damage about to be done. Truthfully, falling from 50,000 feet was a high range where Izuku could have been flipped by the villain to take the damage. An explosion rang out from the two touching back down on the surface of the earth, and as the heroes as well as reporters looked on in shock at the level of power shown they searched the area for where the villain as well as the new hero were at. Looking at a massive crater in the ground they found both villain and angel fighting in the middle of it, increasing the depth of the crater as shockwaves blasted through the air. All for One had thrown a wild left hook which Izuku ducked under, then twirled his hands on the arm and lightly pushed it away before sending a kick to the villain's face. As the villain skidded across the ground, he was leaning backward before starting to right himself, but that was when he struggled to stand back up. Looking down at his right arm, he noticed that golden chains covered it from hand all the way up to his shoulder, and that was when more golden chains with a small pointed end had wrapped around his entire body holding him still. Izuku touched down in front of the villain once more as he smiled at the villain, reaching a hand into a golden portal that formed next to his head. Izuku pulled out a massive weapon that was at least half his size. The red blocky tip had started to glow as Izuku's entire form showed a massive green and blue tint for an aura as he pointed the blade's tip at All for One's chest. There was a saying that an excommunicated priest once said to devils as well as those who strayed from the faith of God. Izuku said, as All for One struggled in the chains even more. As Bakugo watched the villain attempt to struggle and escape from the weird chains, they seemed to get even tighter on the villain, not like they cared though. But that was when Izuku had decided to speak towards the struggling villain, as if he were a mere child. Punished be the wicked, kind of fitting you know. For a villain who is so wicked that he would turn the descendant of All Might's very own master against him and all of society. Izuku said, as All for One stared in horror. Placing the tip of the blade on All for One's body, Izuku smiled at the villain as he stated only 2 words once more. Inuma Elish. Izuku said, as a massive red beam blasted through the villain's body and blasted far off into the atmosphere. With the blast moving through the villain's body, everyone who was watching the scene before themselves just sat there staring in both awe as well as horror as a villain who gave All Might a run for his money, even winning against him, had been taken out with something akin to an ultimate move made for gods. Bakugo watched on in horror as the villain let out a fierce scream of agony, as well as pain as his entire body, from what Katsuki could see within the beam of energy, started to slowly disappear. But as soon as the beam was over, everyone on the helicopter as well as those who were watching on the Jumbotron were in shock at how this random person had defeated a villain that All Might couldn't defeat. All seemingly without any kind of effort, and it was here that they all noticed that the person started to move towards the now struggling All Might as he tried to stand back up. As Izuku placed his hand over the heavily injured hero, he watched as All Might's complexion had returned back to normal before the flame hero Endeavor appeared behind Izuku. It was here that Bakugo knew that he had to meet his old victim for the one thing he had always wanted closure on. So as he ran away from the group in order to get to the boy before it was too late, he arrived at the site a few minutes later as he watched Endeavor walk away towards the other heroes. He took this as his time to run over to Izuku as the young man was preparing himself to leave once more. But as soon as the boy raised his arms into the air, he watched as a bright light appeared in the middle of the area as everyone went about the rescue efforts. Bakugo soon reached Izuku and with tears in his eyes, he looked at how Izuku looked now, and it seemed as if whatever training Izuku went through really worked, since he was stronger than All Might himself. Izuku stared at him in disbelief as well as shock as he saw Bakugo staring at him with tears in his eyes. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, his voice as soft as ever. And Bakugo, in a moment of weakness, he done something he will forever state that he never did, he gave Izuku a hug. "Look Deku, you don't have to forgive me for the piece of shit I was for most of your life. But look, I'm so sorry for what I did in the past. I regretted everything that I had done ever since that fucking day, okay? I never got to apologize believing that you took my advice and did that," Bakugo said, as Izuku just sat there as he felt tears brimming to the surface. "Why are you apologizing?" Izuku asked. "I fucked up, okay? I know I did, I realized it when I found out you ran away from the orphanage. I looked everywhere you could have gone, even that fucked up church on that hill in Musatafu. But you were nowhere to begin with. I never saw how you were trying to be my friend in the past, and with everyone just bringing my ego up over the years, I treated you like you were trash, literal trash under my foot. I know that you shouldn't forgive me for the things I did, but before you leave, I want to at least give myself peace in mind, knowing that you didn't follow my advice as well. But I promise that I will become the hero you always wanted me to become," Bakugo said, as Izuku stared at him in shock. "K-K-Kacchan, I always forgave you for everything. I've moved on from that, but if you are willing to be like this because of regret, how could I refuse accepting your apology?" Izuku asked, before hugging Bakugo once more. It was here that both boys let out their tears, finally a bridge slowly beginning reconstruction. Izuku slowly then disappeared from the area, as Bakugo stared at where the boy was disappearing to, over to a rooftop nearby. Tears streaming down his eyes, Bakugo smiled at Izuku as the young man had waved at him before disappearing from view. "Bro, who the hell was that?" Kirishima asked, looking concerned. "That Kirishima was the boy who I had bullied for 10 long years. If you don't wish to be my friend anymore, then that's fine. But just know I would like to stay as rivals," Bakugo said, as Kirishima stared at him. "Dude, I'm not leaving your side. You are a really manly dude, to admit that takes guts. I'm not happy of what you did, but the fact that you asked for forgiveness and seem to be making a great deal of time to change who you are. I think that you are pretty manly, even if you lost a bit of trust from me. But that won't make me lose our friendship and rivalry, you won't get rid of me that easily," Kirishima said, as he gave Bakugo a hug. "Don't worry bro, I will always be here to help you. No matter what. Fear not Bakugo. For I am here," Kirishima said, trying to emulate All Might. As soon as those words left Kirishima's mouth, caused Bakugo to start giggling before starting to laugh when a pop appeared near them. No. That isn't how you talk like All Might. It's like this. Fear not citizens. Hope has arrived. For I am here," a familiar voice called out. Looking over to who had said that, it was revealed to be Izuku standing there with a very convincing All Might face. He. Ha 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 ha. Bakugo had started to full-on belly laugh. That's it guys. Thanks for watching and supporting us. See you in the next part.